So here we are, the relaunch of the Racing Mental podcast. I am super excited. I don't know about you, Toby.
Yeah, properly. It's so cool to be part of this.
Yeah, and this is something that I've been wanting to relaunch for so long, but just kind of never really got around to it, just because running a podcast is really difficult. So it's really nice to now have a team around me with you and with Momentum Social, just to kind of get this off the ground and start delivering this kind of value to drivers again, because I know everyone loves to listen to podcasts when they're working or in the car or wherever they might be.
Yeah, we've got so much to talk about. We've kind of planned the next 12 weeks ahead of us, of all different areas of sponsorship. And yeah, we've had so much to share with you guys, and it's super exciting that we finally got this launched.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sense to me that we start with talking about branding, because I think that's an often overlooked area for racing drivers. I'm curious as to kind of what your definition of branding is.
Yeah, I think you're right with regards to it's often overlooked. I think branding is super, super important because it's the first thing that people see. And that's likewise for fans and businesses and sponsors and all the people around motorsport. But it's also the thing that they remember the most. So branding's super, super important. I noticed, Jess, when I first met you, your branding was super, super cool. And it stayed with me right up to this point that you're really, really there. And all of your branding just looks absolutely on point. So can you tell me a bit about how you come about your branding?
So I mean, you've seen the old podcast logo and some of the old stuff that Racing Mentor did, and it was really, really just pulled together. But I knew that it needed a really, really strong visual brand, because there's so many strong visual brands in motorsport. You just look at some really cool race car liveries and you can see that. So I knew that Racing Mentor needed to be the same. And I went through a really cool branding session with the design agency, and they took me through stuff that I knew, like my target audience, all this kind of thing. And they came up with these 4 concepts. And the one that we went with, this kind of almost 3D, a little bit of checkered flag inspiration, and then these steps, which are the levels of motorsport. It all just came together and made sense. But I knew that my brand had to be more than just that cool logo. So it's been a process of kind of learning what people respond to, and as the audience kind of changes with the launch of the book and stuff like that. So it's about kind of my tone of voice and how I speak to people, as well as those little design cues that are on stuff like my Instagram posts. So it's definitely been an evolution, but I just wanted to be consistent, which is, I think, is actually where a lot of people fall down with their branding. There's no consistency there. They have a nice logo and they maybe have a color, but they don't really take it any further than that.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing with branding, because most people see branding as just the logo or just the color scheme of their business or racing page or whatever. But branding's far more than that, isn't it? Branding's the kind of personality you bring across, the values you've got, and the overall look of everything, not necessarily just the logo. So you're quite right in saying that, you've got to be open to exploring what is branding to you and what that message is you want to put out there to your fans, sponsors, and even if you're a business, to to your customers. And that's the super important part with branding.
And it's about being instantly recognizable. So yes, a logo and yes, a color will do that, but it's about being able to read someone's tweet, for example, and knowing it's from that person without even having to look at the logo.
Yeah,
So that
definitely.
tone of voice, I think, is really, really important. I think that kind of comes from my background in, as a content writer and as a marketer. But I think, if anyone's listening who's thinking about their brand, they should think beyond those, few kind of logo things, and think about, how they come across as a whole. Like what will someone think of you when they look at your social profiles, for example, with your logo, with your colors, and with the kind of content you're posting. What will someone immediately think of you? And if that's not the top 3 keywords that you're trying to portray, then you maybe need to have another look at your brand.
Exactly. And anyone out there that kind of wants to, that's listening to this, that wants to actually build their brand and develop it and maybe enhance what they've already got. That's the best way to look at it, is kind of look from the outside in, look at, as a fan or as a sponsor, and look into your business or your racing channel and sort of go, what does this message currently say? And is this true to me?
Mm.
I think with my branding, it's all about kind of being my simple kind of design of my branding was all about being quite minimal,
Mm-hmm.
but also quite bright and bold, and just kind of almost bringing my personality to it, because as most people know that I'm quite a smiley, quite happy person with a lot of energy. So my brand is that's the central to my brand, and everything I create is kind of aimed towards that.
And I think there's another good point about your brand, because your branding is quite slick and sharp, but then you're also quite a sharp dresser. So that like it suddenly makes sense when you see you out and about at events or at meetings. It works with your brand. Whereas if someone maybe has a more playful brand and they turn up to a meeting in a suit, it kind of doesn't gel. And I think people can pick up on that there's not this kind of cohesive brand element where like you get it really right. And I think I hope I do in the same way, because you know I'm there in colorful blazers or leather jackets, which kind of goes with the edginess of the Racing Mentor brand look.
Yeah, and that's it, Jess. Like you stand out as you,
Yeah.
but you fall par and par with your brand, with everything you post, everything you do. You're kind of you're one. You know, the whole thing is you and your business and the way you put yourself out there, and that's quite an important message. I remember having a chat actually at Motorsport Days Live with I can't remember what his name was now, but we was chatting about branding and the way you're perceived by people every time, because unfortunately we're in this world where we judge very, very quickly. We've got very little time on our hands, and we do judge very, very quickly. And having a kind of brand that is strong and represents you and the way you are, and if you're happy with that, then straight away you're putting out the message that you want, and that's what people buy into, isn't it? That's really important.
And there's I don't know exactly what the stat is, but it's very, very difficult to undo a bad first impression.
Yeah, I think so.
So if someone's going out and meeting a sponsor and they've made the wrong impression, whether that's, you know, a bad impression or just the wrong one, it's very hard to change someone's mindset about that. So I think it's really important that, you know, drivers are thinking about how they come across generally, how their brand comes across generally, and does everything kind of fit together and portray the right message. So when they do go in and meet a sponsor already knows kind of what they're going to be getting from this person.
And that's why it brings us on to our next point of, you know, what role does it play for drivers? Because when you meet sponsors, if you're putting out the correct brand message that you want to, and they receive that on that first impression, then you know that for the long term, as long as you can keep that consistency, you're going to be delivering exactly what you want to your sponsors. And that kind of helps attract the right kind of sponsors for you as well, because obviously when you're looking at sponsorship, you know it's more of a partnership than a one-way sponsorship. So you know we want to work together and closely with our partners, and having your brand you know in your own way,
Mm.
that's really important to make sure that you're attracting the right kind of people.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level of professionalism that comes with having a strong brand. And I think, you know, if a driver is going for a logo, that's great. It's important to have something that you're easily recognizable by. But I think having a wider brand than that, it gives a potential sponsor a chance to kind of check in on you and see if there's a fit. Because if your values come across really strongly in your brand, or you know, they can get a sense of whether you're fun, whether you're a bit more corporate, um, they'll know whether your brand fits them. And if it doesn't, they'll know that you probably haven't done your research. But if it does, then it's more likely to get a driver you know, a phone call or even a meeting.
Absolutely, because it's how you represent yourself, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, I always look back at real life examples in business and why, as a consumer, I buy a particular product. And I'm a bit of an Apple fan, and for example, their phones, they don't necessarily have, you know, revolutionary technology. A lot of the other brands have very similar cameras and tech inside their phones, but the way Apple put their brands together and the way they launch their phones and the whole kind of message that they bring, it encourages me to be a customer to them. And
Mm.
I think you can learn a lot from industry and bring that into racing and put that into your brand. That's exactly it, isn't it? Is what message do you want to put out there?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Let's like just looking at the Puma video we did together, those little design details that Puma had on like their race suits, like the zip, the designs on the bottom of the shoes, all of that kind of thing. Those little things go beyond their logo but it says so much about the brand and like the racing history within it. And it's those little things that make a brand so much more than a logo. And there are so many cool ways that drivers can incorporate that into their motorsport, whether it's, you know, something like always having a certain pattern of wrap on their mirrors, little design cues like that that could then maybe match, you know, something that they have in an Instagram post or the header on their Facebook page. That kind of brings all of these different parts of motorsport together. So
Yeah.
from the social to on the track to, you know, in person when you're handing over, you know, a pretty proposal document.
Yeah, and I think it's those subtleties that really do enhance your brand. Because I remember when we first picked up the Puma gear to do the review video, obviously the gear was beautiful quality and everything was really specially made. But then when we actually were starting to look at it in more detail, we were seeing kind of all of this, you know, these subtle things like the accelerator pedal as the zip, for example, and on the boots had throttle and brake, and it was all just like you could put the two together. It all just blended in so perfect, wasn't it? And you know, all those subtle things gave you this image of Puma and what they're about, and it made them feel really, really high end.
Yeah.
And that's you know, and people in the industry do look on that scale, don't they? The subtle things subconsciously in your mind really does transform your opinion of what that brand is about. And I think if you're looking at like even like your social profiles, my branding now, I've kind of developed it with Purple Tash, and we've got a great, you know, great looking image. But even down to the actual images I post on my social feeds, I've created I call it a filter, I guess, but I use that same filter every single time, and it sort of mutes some of the tones of greens and oranges, but it pumps out the blues, which is my, you know, my brand. So
Yeah,
now
I do the same and bring out the pinks.
exactly, yeah, and then that's your brand going through your imagery, so that it's, you know, the imagery is easily recognizable that it's related to you. And I think I learned that when I was playing around with photography, because a lot of people look at different photographers and each photographer has their own style, but obviously we're sharing images of race cars and, you know, ourselves and all the things we're getting up to. So why shouldn't we enhance our brand with imagery with the tones that you also want to represent?
Exactly. And I think there's a way that drivers can kind of elevate themselves with good branding. So, you know, even if someone's driving at, let's say, club level, but they want to be at, let's say, international GT level, or even, you know, moving up the ranks to Formula One, if early on they can create a brand for themselves that's, you know, that kind of high level that will appeal to the kind of businesses that will see them through to the end of their career. It's about perceived value. This is a business term that I always use, and I used it loads when we were talking about the stuff I was doing with Turn 8 Racing, and when we were getting sponsors. I was going in with like silly amounts of money and going in high because I wanted the perceived value to be high. So I wanted people to look at our race team and think, oh, they're really high end, they're worth the money. Whereas if a driver has kind of got no logo, no real cohesive brand, then no one's going to look at them and go, yeah, I will give you 50,000 for that drive. And they're going to kind of be stuck at, you know, getting 500 quid here, 200 quid here, which is obviously all great, but it doesn't move you up the ranks in the same way. Whereas if early on you can have a brand that says, I am worth this money, look how professional I am, it's going to get you so much further.
Yeah, and I think like when on that note is it leads kind of into the brand ambassador role of what is sponsorship. I like to aim myself to be an ambassador for my sponsors, so constantly representing them in the best possible way. But also that means that my brand needs to be absolutely on point to do that. Because if for example, let's look at Purple Tash as my latest sponsor. If all of my now logos and all my kind of documents and everything was just all a bit, you know, different colors and not on brand, then I'm not representing them. So
Yeah.
when you're now looking to attract those kind of higher end and deliver that value, it just shows how important your branding is, to elevate yourself to those sponsors.
Yeah. And I really love the phrase, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And, you know, that is obviously aimed at people who are, you know, walking around in a suit because they want to have, you know, a CEO job one day. But I think it's really relevant to racing drivers in terms of their brand and how you think about that and how it's important to kind of plan for the future.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think the biggest thing that people miss out on is consistency. And this is something that I tried to hammer into people when we were doing the RM Fast Feb before the world completely fell apart. Is that consistency is so important in every single thing you do when it comes to sponsorship. So from your branding to your social channels, everything needs to be consistent. So if you're going to be using blue, for example, as your brand color, it has to be the same blue every time.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be doing, you know, graphical posts on your Instagram, then they have to kind of all match, which is what I've been doing lately. But even just consistency with like how often you're posting, your tone of voice, the way that your videos are shot, all of that kind of comes together as this wider brand, and people will start to recognize it. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and keeping that consistency, you know, I've got a quick tip for you guys that if you want to keep your consistent look, what I've created is like a PDF of the colors that I use. So I've got like the code of that particular colors. All your font faces on one place as well. So even font is really, really important as part of your brand message. But yeah, I've got this PDF that has got all my colors, my logo, shapes, font, and all the things that are my brand, and even just messages about what I'm representing. So every time that I then create a piece of content, I refer to that guide so that I then make sure that everything I'm doing is on brand. And I think that's quite a cool tip.
Yeah, and I do exactly the same. And I actually have just started paying for Canva Pro, and they have a brand kit within there. So because I use Canva to design a lot of my my graphics, and especially my Instagram graphics, it's really cool now because I've got the three colors that I use most. I've got the fonts that I use, but it just means that when I go in and create, you know, a new text element in Canva, it's already in the right font, it's already the right size, it's already the right color. So it's really, really easy. And I know a lot of people kind of struggle for time with this stuff. And, you know, if you don't have design skills and don't know how to use Photoshop, or you're just pressed for time, canva.com, it's like a web-based thing for anyone who doesn't know. It is so good for kind of saving time with that kind of thing. And I even created a couple of templates, which now means people who work for me or with me can go in and create graphics on my behalf. So it's, you know, it's super easy. So anyone that is thinking, well, how do I get this cohesive brand and how do I create these graphics? Canva is the way forward if you don't have design skills.
Yeah, and you don't need state-of-the-art equipment to then do that. You know, you've got a quite a convenient way to keep on brand. And people that are listening to this, you've all probably seen Jess's RM current Instagram feed. It looks absolutely stunning, Jess. But you've got everything on brand. You kind of like you alternate image post to a graphical post, but everything looks absolutely bang on. So that's been a recent change, I think, and I'm really impressed. It looks so good.
And like it looks good, but I think it's also impressing people who then come along to my feed and kind of decide whether or not they should follow me. So like I think at the beginning of May I had about 1,700 followers. I've now got over 1,800. So I'm adding followers really quick because of that. People are coming to my feed and aren't just going, oh, this is boring, it's just more photos of cars. It looks like it's well put together, and they know that they're going to get nice race cars and advice in there. And I know that's a lot harder to do as a racing driver, because, you know, you can't always do those graphical posts, but, you know, there's certainly a lot that drivers can do, like you're doing, Toby, with the filters to make that kind of that look more, it looks all together and like correct and consistent.
Yeah, and keeping that cohesiveness all the way through. But you know, I think you can even just put like quotes of, you know, like racing driver quotes or things that you're up to as text-based images, and they will be on brand. You know, it can be really, really simple. But I agree. Like you know, Instagram for you, for the most part, is your shop window, isn't it? You know, when you go on to RM, you want to see exactly what you're trying to put out, exactly what you want people to see, which is obviously that clear message of what you do and how you go about doing it, and all those really poppy graphical graphical posts you put on there. Quickly you can identify kind of what your brand's about because it's really strong, and also the messages putting out because they're really clear, and it's so cool to see that kind of transformation. I remember we was having a chat a while ago, weren't we, about your aims with RM, and by what you're doing now, you're really, really getting there.
Yeah, the Racing Mentor kind of Instagram and actually all of the social channels now are much more together. And I'm not perfect. I'm still trying to build that consistency with things like posting on the blog. Like, I've got so many ideas. Actually, from our webinar, Toby, I had Rose write up a load of notes from it.
Okay.
With all the questions that people asked, and I've now got about 20 blog posts sitting in my Trello, which is how I product manage stuff. So I've started outlining some of them. So I'm hoping that that's a good kind of catalyst for me to start posting more consistently on the blog as well.
Yeah, because that's super important, because if
Yeah.
you've got that space as a blog, people will come back to find out what the next step is or what they can learn, and keeping that kind of weekly consistency, or however often you're looking to do it, is really key. Like I'm in the process of my YouTube channel, and that's been a whole learning process of how to create a style on there that's on brand and also putting out the right message. And I've worked quite close with Momentum Social and Purple Tash to actually make sure that everything that I create from my YouTube channel is on point. But obviously that's a whole learning process in its own part. But consistency in posting is, like you say, really, really important there, because I'm hoping that people are enjoying the content that we're putting out, and that they'll come back each week at the same time to see the next episode. And Thursdays at 7 p.m. is currently our kind of launch time. But it works exactly the same for you in your blog post, doesn't it? If you're posting out regular, that, okay, I wonder if Jess has put something back on the blog today, and I can read about it on my morning coffee, for example. So I suppose it kind of goes full circle. What we're talking about with branding is that it's not necessarily just the logo you put out, the color scheme you've got, but it's everything you do on a really sort of almost microscopic level, I suppose. Is that the right way to put it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But all those subtle things that you do, it puts the message out there of who you are, what your brand is, and what you're looking to represent.
Yeah, and it all builds to this one thing, which is being recognizable for the right reasons.
Yes.
Which kind of takes us back to our first point of why a brand is important, because if it might not be a conscious thing that a potential sponsor or a fan or whoever might look at these little details, like the fact that your YouTube videos go out at the same time, or that you've got this great Instagram feed. They might not look at that and go, wow, a cohesive brand, how great, unless they're obviously a branding agency, or you're speaking to a brand manager or someone like that. But all of these things will come together and they'll go, yeah, this person's really professional, I want to work with them, or they look really fun, or they have values that match mine. Whatever it is that has kind of attracted you to a sponsor, that goes two ways. And I think the way that it can go the other way is with a really, really great brand.
Yeah, and I think, like, what you've got to be conscious of with branding, and particularly your pitch to sponsors, is that these people genuinely have not a lot of time spare, so you've got to make that first impression very quick. And I take this back from a real world example, that we all get junk mail through our door with usually really bad branding, and it's all a bit kind of average, press printed, not greatness.
Yeah.
And you get them through the door and you look at it and you just chuck them in the bin, and they could actually be given the best service or best product.
Yeah.
But because they've not actually delivered a good brand message, you've just chucked it in the bin. You've not even taken notice of it. And I think that's kind of like a metaphor to maybe what sponsors do. Is if you're sending an email with no branding, you've got a proposal that's kind of just not on your brand, and it doesn't look like the same thing of maybe your email signature or the image they've seen of you on social media, and it just doesn't all look cohesive. Are they going to give it the time that it deserves? Because genuinely, you could be offering an amazing service to that sponsor, you could really benefit them, and you could work with them in a really great way, but they might not actually even give you the time to think about that if that whole process is not cohesive enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we move on and talk about our driver of the week?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So this is a weekly competition that myself and Jess are running, where we're going to be voting our driver of the week on week, in relative to what the episode is about. So obviously this week's branding, and we're going to vote who we feel deserves to be our driver of the week. So Jess, I don't know if you've got any more to touch on that.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense to kind of keep it within the Racing Mentor / Podium Club family to begin with, as this is our first episode. But from this week onwards, once people have listened to this podcast, I'm really, really keen for people to get involved on the Racing Mentor sponsorship community and just share their wins with us, because I want to know what everyone is doing, because it's interesting and it's inspirational. But I think it makes sense to reward drivers who are working hard. So it doesn't necessarily have to be those big wins. It can be small things, small wins that people have done and things they've achieved, or just, a cool blog post they wrote, a great, Instagram post that got tons of engagement. So if anyone's interested in kind of putting themselves forward, you can email me, jess@racingmentor.com, or if you're in the Racing Mentor sponsorship community on Facebook, you can post in there and tell us what you're doing. If you're not already part of that group, though, go find it on Facebook, because that's where we share kind of most of our updates, but then also tons of advice, and it's also a safe space for people to ask questions as well. So that's quite a long intro for me to talk about Nathan Williams, who is part of the Racing Mentor Podium Club, just as Toby is. He has been working super hard on a new logo. By the time this goes out, it will be last week. So Nathan launched his logo last week, so you can find it on his social channels. He's Williams_ND on Instagram if anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see that. And for those of you guys that want to see branding done well, then definitely give him a follow.
Just seeing his dedication and the way that he's kind of planning things and thinking ahead to the future, I think is really inspirational. And he is kind of embodying everything that we've just talked about, Toby. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think with Nathan, like, his strategy is on brand. Like, everything that he's now got planned for the future is absolutely on brand. And for those that do follow Nathan, he's just recently put like a kind of teaser of what's to come. And that's like a subtle message of what is to come, but also it kind of highlights a little bit of what that brand might look like. But I'm really excited to see how he now follows that through and shows everyone his branding. But yeah, he's got a really cool look coming your way.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't follow him on Instagram, he's Williams_ND. And yeah, you guys are going to be quite impressed with his logo, and it really fits his brand, and this kind of wider image that he's putting out as this kind of fitness personality as well as a racing driver. So yeah, I think we're in agreement that our first ever driver of the week is Nathan.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Awesome. So yeah, so anyone who wants to kind of become part of the discussion and share their wins, do email me or do post in the group. It'd be really cool to see what everyone is doing. But yeah, I think we've just finished our first ever podcast, Toby. This is exciting.
Yeah, properly exciting. I mean, it's great to actually put this together, and yeah, it's we've got some cool stuff coming up, and I think I'd like to just say, if anyone's got any questions, do post them into the community, because this is what this whole podcast is about, is for you to understand more about sponsorship and all the kind of essential parts that RM teaches. So yeah, welcome
Awesome.
to our podcast, and thank you for listening.
And we'll be putting these out every week. So wherever you listen to your podcasts, please subscribe, and then you'll get the next one immediately. But we'll obviously be talking about it on social media. And as Toby says, if you have any questions, please hit us up. Anywhere on social media that you can find Racing Mentor, which is everywhere. So yeah, we'll see you.